Buongiorno e benvenuto a tutti. I think most of you know me, but perhaps not all. I'm Father Dean Béchard. I'm on the faculty here at the Biblical Institute. And it's my privilege this morning to introduce our honored guest and speaker, Dr. Harry Nasuti from Fordham University in New York City, who has been with us this semester as a visiting professor. You'll allow me a brief personal note. As in exegesis, so also in life, there is often an inclusio. And we have one today. Before coming to the Biblical Institute, I first taught for several years at Fordham University. And when I arrived at Fordham, Dr. Nasuti was already there, a thriving member of the faculty, and he was among those who welcomed me and offered guidance and encouragement. And now, many years later, I have the opportunity to return the favor. It's a privilege to be among those here at the Biblical Institute who welcome you and your wife, Dr. J.L. Nasuti, for your sojourn in Rome and your service as a visiting professor on our faculty. So, on behalf of the professors and the students at the Biblical Institute, I express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Nasuti. He is concluding his tenure at Fordham, where he's been a highly esteemed professor, teacher, a very productive scholar with many publications, especially on prophetic literature and the Psalms, and an active and important member of the Catholic Biblical Association in the United States. So it's only fitting that this association has sponsored his semester-long contribution and presence here at the Biblical Institute. So I introduce to you Dr. Nasuti, who will speak to us about Isaiah. The title of his lecture is Beyond the Divine Eye, the Role of Other Texts in Isaiah 40 to 45. Dr. Nasuti.
Thank you, Dean. It was great anguish to me when Dean left Fordham to come to the PBI. My loss is your gain, I think. So thank you so much. Okay. This is a strange lecture. By the way, I teach in this classroom, and so I am very familiar with the acoustics in this classroom. Can people in the back, am I coming out clear? Because sometimes there's this gigantic echo. And what we've done in my class was we simply said, forget this electronic stuff and I'll just shout. And that works really well. I mean, since I normally shout, that works really well. So can you hear me in the back without an echo? You're okay? How about over there? You're okay? All right. And all the way, I'm wondering why you're all the way over there, but okay. All right. This is a strange paper. I'm sure you saw, second Isaiah. This is great. I mean, the theology, the poetry of second Isaiah. How could we miss a lecture on second Isaiah? All those great divine speeches, I am the first, I am the last, all of these things. And I'm not going to talk about any of them. All right. That's what makes this a strange paper. I mean, obviously a lot has been written on second Isaiah. I'm counting on the fact that the Advent liturgies are enough for you to hear about the divine I speeches, the first person speeches of God. It's just filled with them these days. But instead, what I want to talk about today are the parts of Isaiah 40 through 55 that don't get talked about all that much. Now, some of them do, but you're going to say, why is he talking about this little half of a verse or something like that? And what I'm going to concentrate are the parts in Isaiah 40 through 55 where it's not God who is speaking, right? It's other voices. That's what the other is here. It's other types of speech that you find in Isaiah 40 through 55. Now, obviously, if you really want to get into these chapters, it's the divine speeches where it's all happening, where the theology and everything is all happening. Instead, I'm going to look at those parts that have received much less scholarly attention and been seen as less important, and even has been consigned to the dustbin of secondary glosses. Those things that they say, well, we don't know what to do with this. We'll just, this is a gloss and we don't have to look at it. All right. So I think we're moving beyond that these days. But anyway, the reason I'm doing this is because I think that these other texts raise interesting questions about Isaiah 40 through 55 and about prophetic books in general. And this has been my main research interest is the Psalms. And as I look over at an Isaiah specialist, I say, why didn't I do something on Psalms rather than on something which is not my main area? But one thing that has been kind of a secondary interest of mine in the prophetic literature has been the way that prophetic books have been put together. They're not just like a jumble of things, that there actually is some kind of purpose in the way that they have been put together. And so this is part of that. I've done work on this in a number of prophets, and we'll see whether, I'll look forward to your questions. All right. Just a couple cautions at the beginning of this. I'm going to be looking at three types of non-divine speech in Isaiah 40 through 55. Narrative. It's one of the interesting things about prophetic books is that they mix speech and narrative texts. Now, Isaiah 40 through 55 doesn't have much narrative, but there is a fairly famous bit of narrative at the very beginning that needs to at least be talked about just a little. There's direct speech by other individuals other than God, all right? And then there's this kind of intermediate category that I'll talk about in my third thing, and that is elaborations to the divine messenger formula. And I'll explain that when we get there. Now, my caution is I can't talk about all of the text. I'll do, there actually is a fair amount of, usually in the form of half verses and that sort of thing. But I can't talk about all of them. So I'm going to concentrate on places where I have clear examples that are going to illustrate what the point that I'm trying to make. As always, there's some murky texts, and I'm sure that you'll ferret them out, and I have looked at them. But I'm going to concentrate on those that are clear in these categories. The other things that I'm going to concentrate on the first parts of Isaiah 40 through 55, and that is from 40 to 49. It's there, really, I think, that these texts make their primary contribution. After that, they get a little bit more murky. I mean, the divine speech and prophetic speech starts to blur and all that sort of thing. So I'll concentrate on 40 through 49. And I also am going to concentrate on the Masoretic text, all right, because, with a couple exceptions. And once again, sometimes the Septuagint has its own goals, and sometimes it smooths out some of these rough things that are exactly what I'm interested in looking at. All right, so, I know there's many Septuagint scholars here, and you just can't wait to say, okay, well, here we have these, the Septuagint does it differently. And yes, in a number of cases, I'm quite aware of that, but I'm interested in what's going on here in the Masoretic text. All right, so let's look at the first of these categories, and that is narrative. All right, so here's a whole bunch of Hebrew, and this passage I suspect you're fairly familiar with. I'm going to not. Okay, that came out as much too small. I should also warn you, I am the world's worst technology person. Look at my age and you'll see why. I mean, I think I did the last non-computer dissertation in the universe. Anyway, put up with the occasional glitches. I tried to fix them and they went right back the way they were. All right, so you know this passage, right? This is the beginning of 2nd Isaiah. The scene is a heavenly council. It begins with a divine speech proclaiming comfort to Jerusalem, and it moves on to the commissioning of an individual. All right, and the individual seems to object to the commission on the basis of Israel's desperate situation, right? All fleshed as grass. But then the individual is either reassured or continues with reassures himself. All right, well, it's a lot about this passage is really not all that clear. The fact that it's narrative shows up in verses 3 and 6, and again, it's very puzzling. I mean, enigmatic. A voice calls. Okay, who is this voice? Well, members of the heavenly council, or whatever. And you see this again in verse 6. Another voice calls. The same voice calls. All right. And then you have the individual answers. Now here, of course, right at the critical moment, there's a text critical problem, as is always the way. And take your pick. I mean, it doesn't really, it's not going to completely affect my thesis either way. But if you go with most of the versions and most of the modern translations, the individual speaks in first-person voice. Then I said, all right. If you go with the Masoretic text, it's then he said, introducing what then follows as a first-person speech. All right, take your pick. I mean, it's, but in any way, it's, what we have here is a dialogue that's going on. All right. You might also have another little bit of divine, narrative marker in the first verse where it says, I think usually said, the Lord, your God says, okay, comfort. All right. Is that a messenger formula? Is that a narrative marker? If it's a messenger formula, it's atypical. All right. I mean, again, these are not things that are going to completely affect what I'm doing, but it's clear that it is a narrative. Usually, people call it the prologue to 2nd Isaiah. All right. What is the significance of starting out with this, again, puzzling narrative text? Well, okay. I give you some possibilities here. I think this is significant because it introduces a cast of characters that we're going to see in the chapters that follow. All right, at least some of these voices reappear, including God, obviously, the individual who speaks, the commissioned individual, as well as Zion and the people. All right. These mysterious voices of, the voice who calls and all that, they don't seem to come back. All right. It's a little similar to Isaiah 6, all right, the other commissioning narrative in the book of Isaiah, where you have all this stuff going on, and then, the other characters continue. But the heavenly counsel is, some of the voices drop out. The other thing that I think that is important about this this prologue is that it alerts the reader to the presence of I never know what to call this in prophetic books, a narrator or presenter, somebody who makes what we're looking at available to us. All right, and in narrative text, you call it a narrator. I don't know what you call it in prophetic text, a presenter. I'll go with narrator now. If you go with the first person in verse 6, then I said, it could be a first person narrator, or if it's and he said, then you have a third person narrator. All right, take your pick. All right, it depends on how you understand verse 6, which versions you want to go to in verse 6. The other thing that it does is it invites the reader, right? It invites the reader of these chapters to consider the identity of who the speakers are in the texts that follow. And often that's obvious, all right? Because when God speaks, God's pretty clear about God speaking. So for example, in chapter 41, God says, I, the Lord, the first, the last. I, the Lord, and then it goes on and speaks in the first person. So that's usually pretty obvious about who's speaking. Other times it's not really that clear who's speaking, all right? Including like the rest of chapter 40. I'm not going to go in detail on the rest of chapter 40, but the identity of the speaker there is not completely straightforward. Most of chapter 40 refers to God in the third person. Now, I know that God can refer to himself as in the third person. Right? That's clear. All right. But it is strange that the rest of chapter 40 is almost completely in the third person. And there also is no messenger formula announcing that what you have is a speech of God. So a number of scholars have said, well, this is not divine speech. This is the speech of the prophet. Okay, and I'm open to that. What happens in that chapter is the individual, the commissioned individual in the prologue, is presented as engaged in three tasks, right? A further commissioning to Zion to get up on a high mountain and announce the good news, all right? Hymnic praise of God as both creator and the primary shaper of history, all right? Verses 12 to 26. And then at the very end of the chapter, you have a debate with Israel and an encouragement of Israel, who is so completely dispirited by their present circumstances. All right, well, what would it mean to see the rest of chapter 40 as the speech of the prophet, right? Or narrator, or however you want to do it. Well, first of all, it raises the possibility that one of the functions of that chapter 40, and some parts of the chapters that are following, is to make present a character who engages Israel, as we saw at the end of chapter 40, but who doesn't share Israel's discouragement over its relationship with God. In other words, he's arguing with Israel. And the presentation of such a character will be seen to have implications for the question of the identity of the servant in the later chapters, right? And I'll just add a literary note. On the literary level, such a view of chapter 40 means that the individual, if it is the prophet or the narrator or left floating in the air, that the individual that describes God in terms of the hymnic language of Israel, that even comes before God's self-presentation. In other words, we hear about God beyond the little speech in the prologue. You hear about God in the third person before you get first person divine speech. So what's the significance of this? All right. As I say, I'm not going to go into detail on 40, but I just wanted to, say, all right, it's out there. Needs to be interpreted. All right. So that's narrative. There's a couple little fragments, very little. I'm not going to use my time to do that here. I can't talk about everything. I think you're already starting to be thankful for that. All right. So we'll go on to the second category. And this is the main one, I think. This is where I'm going to put a lot of effort on, little crazy half verses and things like that. All right. I already mentioned that chapter 41, verse 1 to chapter 42, verse 9, consists of direct divine speech where God speaks in the first person to engage the nations and then to address Israel. By the way, the first servant song is part of this larger block of first person divine speech. Right? This is in contrast to what you're going to see later on when we get to chapter 49. This is God introducing the servant. Again, the identity of the servant, as always, is controversial here. But God speaks about the servant in the third person. All right. The section ends, though, in chapter 42 with verses 10 to 13. Right? This is the first of a series of hymnic passages. I of course, since I'm at the PBI, I figure I give you about 5 seconds to translate the Hebrew before I put the English up on the board. All right. So if you want to go back to the Hebrew, we can do that if you would like. All right. This is the first of a series of hymnic passages that conclude major sections of Isaiah 40 through 55. And I think on the next slide, I give you those passages. I'm not going to read them out here. By the way, you also have that in First Isaiah, in chapter 12. The form of this passage, as if there's anybody here who is from my Psalms class, you can do the form criticism yourself. All right, this form is very similar to the opening of hymns in the book of Psalms. All right, it starts with a call to praise, with a summons to sing to the Lord a new song, which is almost a direct quote from many Psalms, and concludes in verse 13 with the reason for such praise, here God's activity as the divine warrior. Well, given the prominence of the nations in the preceding chapters, it's appropriate that those who are called to praise here include the whole earth, natural elements, the sea, the coastlands, the desert, and those who inhabit those places, the nations, and so on. All right, Psalms 96 and 98 are particularly close parallels to this passage. All right, both beginning with the same opening call to praise directed to the nations and the natural elements of the earth. All right, well, how do you understand who is speaking this passage? Right? Who is calling to praise here? All right. Well, the speaker of 41:1 to 42:9 is clearly God. And God just as clearly speaks again in 42:14, at least until verse 20. So it's possible that one could see, let me go back to that, it's possible that one could see God as the one continuing to speak in these verses, even in the face of the consistent third-person reference to God throughout. And yet, to do that would completely go against the normal way that anybody familiar with Israelite hymns would understand this passage. That is, as a call by the member of the worshiping community for the rest of the world to acknowledge God. Right? So, it doesn't identify the speaker, but the form helps to identify the speaker. Right? So, what do we get? What can we say about the speaker? All right, we don't have a name. All right, we hardly have any names in Isaiah 40 through 55. But what can we say about the speaker? Well, what are the attributes of this speaker? Well, first of all, the speaker shows an awareness of what God is doing in the world. Right? He calls for a new song in response to the new things that God has announced in verse 9. Right? The speaker also bears faithful witness to God in the larger world, calling on the nations to praise. Right? Now, this could be a comment by the prophetic book's equivalent of an omniscient narrator. In other words, this is the author or something like that. But it could also be that the narrative voice here should be identified with the first-person voice of the one who was called back in chapter 40 for the purposes of making God's plan known. In other words, this is part of that commissioned individual's call. Right? If one opts for the second of these possibilities, and you know where I'm going to go with this, right? I mean, you can quibble about individual passages. My goal is to kind of amass enough evidence that I kind of snow you under with this stuff. But you see where I'm going to go. But if you opt for that second possibility, right? The point is to keep this individual in the forefront of these chapters, right? And to give this individual an ongoing presence in the book, right? And the affirmative response that this individual calls for, right, is a response to what God has just announced. That God in that wonderful divine first person. But this is the response to that. And it's a response that's called for not only to the nations, not only to Israel, but I would contend also for the reader of the book, right? That this is at least one possibility here. All right. Okay. So the next little bit of non-divine speech, all right, is in chapter 42, verse 24. As I said, I was going to be dealing with half verses and things like that, right? Here you have a first-person plural subject, at least in the MT, okay? Again, I'm working with the MT here. Was it not the Lord against whom we have sinned? All right, well, that's obviously not God, all right? God's not talking here, all right? And this comes in the midst of a third-person, in the midst of a section of third-person references, which, of course, well, maybe you can read it, I don't know. Third-person references to God, verses 21 to 25, but between two sections of first-person divine speech. And all of this, I think, seems to suggest a non-divine speaker for this section. All right, so let's once again, we don't have a name, but let's at least once again try to describe who the speaker is here. right? What are the attributes of the speaker? Well, the speaker sees the judgment on Israel as deserved, okay, for God's sake, God's righteousness' sake. The speaker also, though, because the speaker is, against whom we have sinned, okay, the speaker also admits to having been part of sinful Israel. And the speaker finally pleads directly with Israel to listen to what God is now saying. Okay. In short, the speaker is characterized here as someone who is both one with Israel in past sinfulness and one with God in trying to stir Israel to take notice of what God is now doing. By the way, if that sounds familiar, you're remembering Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah, when he is commissioned, admits that he is a man of unclean lips in the midst of a people of unclean lips. All right? In other words, that he has to be cleansed of his own sinfulness. Right? So this is not an unusual portrait here, especially if you've read the first part of the book. Okay. Here we go. I mean, more of these things. All right. You then have a whole big section of divine speech, which is beautiful and theologically rich, and I'm skipping over. All right. And you find in chapter 44, verse 23, another hymnic passage, similar to chapter 42, verses 10 to 13. All right. Okay. And here, those summoned to sing and shout for joy are the heavens, the depths of the earth, the forest with all its trees. The reference to the heavens and the earth anticipates the description of God's creation of those entities in the verse that follows this verse. All right? While the reference to trees sets the stage for the idol passage, which talks a lot about trees in chapter 44, verses 9 to 20. An even more important connection here to the context comes in the concluding section, right, which gives the reason for the summons, namely that God has redeemed Jacob and will be glorified in Israel. Right, Isaiah 44:22, the verse that precedes this passage, describes how God has swept away Israel's sins and bases its call for Israel's return to God on the statement, "For I have redeemed you." Right? Once again, one can see this passage as, possibly coming from an omniscient narrator of some sort, giving you a perspective on the text. But it could also be the voice of a particular candidate involved in the action of that text. If the latter, once again, we can talk about what is the nature of this speaker. What are the attributes of this speaker? Well, once again, the speaker is aware of what God has done in redeeming Israel and sees it as a cause for all the nation to rejoice. By calling on the earth to praise, the speaker again bears faithful witness to God in the wider world. Are you tired of these yet? I mean, this is, all right, I hope I'm building a case here, so we'll see. All right. Isaiah 45, all right, verse 15. After another lengthy switch of divine first-person speech, you have a short passage addressed to God in the second person. And there's considerable scholarly debate about the speaker of this passage. It should say, "You are a God who hides himself." I think I made that correction on this translation, but didn't show up in my text. Great. All right. Some say it's a continuation of the speech that starts before this to the nations. All right. To my mind, that's unlikely because of the switch of addressee here. Instead, I would opt for the alternate scholarly opinion that this is a reflection on the preceding article by what a number of scholars have said is the prophetic author. And if this is the case, then I think 15, and most probably 16 and 17, with its direct address to Israel, flesh out the relationship between this figure and both God and Israel, right? So what are the attributes of the speaker? Well, the speaker expresses amazement at the way God is acting in human history, possibly with the use of Cyrus to achieve God's purposes. The speaker expresses a firm belief that God is the Savior of Israel. That word is used a number of times in the preceding speech, right? And assures Israel. The speaker is confident enough to assure Israel that it will not be put to shame. Again, you're getting a picture of this speaker, and it's a consistent picture. All right. Isaiah 47, verse 4. Okay, small verse. Our Redeemer, Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Well, the our gives it away. I mean, this is a speaker who is, again, it's not God, can't be God, all right? So it's a speaker who is, we can go to the attributes. He expresses solidarity with Israel, once again, in its relationship with God, and again, is bearing witness to God's actions on behalf of Israel. All right, I mean, again, you might say, well, why am I bothering with these little verses? Well, again, I'm building a case here. I'm sorry, what do I... Good. Okay. Okay. 48, 1-2, another one of these things. Again, the Lord of hosts is his name. All right, we just saw this in 47. And again, it's the same thing. I mean, God really can't say that. I mean, would say the Lord of hosts is my name. And again, I just go to the attributes. I know I'm going a little slow here, but we'll get there. It affirms God's relationship with Israel, and yet at the same time calls Israel to account for less than faithful confession of God. If you look at the rest of those verses, all right. So the speaker here is a faithful servant of God, and also is arguing with Israel. All right. Okay. And by the way, that confession of that arguing with Israel continues all through chapter 48. All right, now I'm going to start to cash my, what I've been doing, cash it in. All right, look at 48:16b. All right. But now the Lord Yahweh has sent me and his Spirit. Right. This is a clear example of first-person divine speech. One that is of obvious importance for the whole of Isaiah 40 through 55. According to Richard Clifford, here you have, he says, the prophet modestly mentions himself as an individual for the second time. The first time being in chapter 40, back in the prologue, chapter 40, verse 6. This connection of the individuals of 46 and 48:16 certainly seems to be a strong possibility. However, what I've been arguing along here is that this individual, who Clifford talks about as popping up here for the second time, has actually been more of a presence in these chapters than you would see if you simply skip from the prologue to this chapter 48, right? That he has actually been present more throughout here. Right. The purpose of this, the larger significance of this, you may see when you look at someone like Klaus Westermann, who has dealt with what he calls this fragment, which he claims cannot possibly be explained in its present context. To quote Westermann, the speaker is someone who is certain that he has been sent by God and endowed with his spirit. Precisely the same sentiments are expressed in the servant song in chapter 49, 1 through 6. Westermann explains this by claiming that 48:16b must have been displaced from the servant song, from that servant song, of which it was either an original part or a gloss. Once again, though, what I would want to argue is that if you consider the possibility that the individual of this verse has been a more persistent presence throughout these chapters, with a distinctive profile throughout Isaiah 40 through 48, it's not surprising that this figure should become even more prominent in the context of Israel's in the context of Israel's continued resistance to God's summons. Okay. And he's aware of this. Okay. All right. So now we get to 49, 1 through 6. All right. And this is, of course, usually seen as the second servant song. All right. If you have bought at least some of what I've said, you see, usually when we deal with these servant songs, you look at the first one in which God is speaking about the servant, and then you come to this second one where the servant is speaking in the first person. And you say, okay, well, that's a big switch. But if you follow what I've been saying along, this servant, this individual, the speaker here, has been more of a presence throughout these chapters than usually we give him credit for. All right? And this helps to make sense out of a number of features of Isaiah 49 that have often been seen as problematic, especially among the relationship between the servant and Israel. And of course, primary among these problems is the fact that in verse 3, the servant is identified with Israel, and of course, Israel has been called the servant all through 40 through 48, right? And yet, in 5 and 6, the servant possesses a mission to Israel, and scholars have, tried to figure out here, including mechanical things like, okay, this is a later addition, but all kinds of ways of trying to make sense out of this. All right. Well, okay. This is this commission. Scholars have usually called this a commissioning narrative, and throughout Isaiah 40 through 48, it's Israel who has been the servant. Right? It's been explicitly called God's servant, the one to whom God has given a mission to the rest of the nations, as in Exodus 19, and on whom God's Spirit rests. Israel, however, has also been described in these chapters as blind and not responsive to God's summons. In contrast, the individual whose voice has appeared throughout these chapters has called upon the nations to recognize and praise God, has just been described as having been sent together with God's Spirit, and that individual has also attempted to bring his fellow Israelites to a recognition of what God is now doing in the world on their behalf, though to no avail, as we see in verse 4 here. Right? The change that takes place in these verses is that the individual is now commissioned to take on himself the role of the servant that belonged to Israel in Isaiah 40 through 48. More exactly, the individual is called to represent or embody Israel by taking on Israel's role as God's servant. And to that end, God designates the speaker as my servant, Israel. As such, the individual no longer simply has the task of raising up Israel and bringing it back to God, though as the chapters that follow show, that task still continues. Rather, the individual is to take on Israel's role with regard to the nations as well. All right, and I won't continue. Obviously, I'm running out of time already, so I'm not going to continue on into the later chapters of Isaiah 40 through 55. I have looked at them. As I say, things become a little bit more blurry in those chapters. I think here things have been fairly clear. All right. Instead, I will just go on to my third category, and maybe I'll try to make this a little bit briefer so that we have time for questions. This is the elaborations of the messenger formula and other indicators of divine speech. All right? And what I want to look at here is how do we take that phrase, thus says the Lord, and it's many different ways of, and it's, there's all kinds of different variations on that. All right. Scholars have usually, though not always, seen that as the prophet's designation of divine speech rather than as part of the divine speech itself. And if that's the case, then the formulas in Isaiah 40 through 55 might provide another source of information about these chapters' voice, about the speaker, the narrative voice, if you want to say, which the above analysis has suggested might have been seen as the voice of the individual called in chapters 40 and 49. And what makes this particularly rich in Isaiah is the fact that the messenger formula and other markers of divine speech here are often elaborated on to an extent that you don't usually see in other prophetic books. And as such, they might provide a distinctive insight into the meaning of the final shape of these chapters, right? So I'm going to look at two examples. One is already up there. One we've already looked at, so we can do fairly quickly. That's the last two verses of that sermon song in 49. All right. Again, you're familiar, I think, with these passages, and we just looked at it. But notice how strange it is here in verse 5. Right? For now, the Lord has spoken, or said the Lord, who formed me from the womb to be his servant. All right? That Jacob might be brought back to him and Israel gathered to him. All right? I am honored in the sight of the Lord. Notice that this is all part of you already had the messenger formula. All right? The Lord has spoken, or thus you said the Lord. All right? It's introducing the divine speech. But before you get to that divine speech, you get the whole history of God and the servant, how the servant is feeling, how he's honored, how he's reacting to his to God, and so much so that in verse 6 you have to repeat the introduction. All right, it's too little, he says. Okay, because the verse 5 has given you so much more information. All right, I'll make you restore it's too light a thing that you restore the survivors of Israel. I'll make you a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. All right. Again, so much is attached there. All right, and so you're being given lots of information here. Which is being spoken, again, it's giving you insight into the servant, all right? Because these elaborations are being spoken by the servant before you actually get to the divine speech in 6 and then on in 7 and on. Right. So the verse gives the reader access to the way that the servant sees himself, and especially to the way that the servant situates his relationship to God in the context of the ongoing narrative of 40 through 55. Right. The other example, and I won't spend too much time on it because, again, I always try to cram in too much here, but let me do it, is Isaiah 45:18. All right. Again, there's just, how do you explain this kind of elaboration of the messenger for him? Thus said the Lord, okay, fine, who created the heavens, that, who's saying that? Is it God or is it the servant? The prophet. He is God. Okay, so not only do you get an elaboration, of who this God is, but you also get, a commentary. He is God who formed the earth and made it. He established it. Right. Okay, so once again, you're being given this witness on the part of the prophet. All right. And it's only once you do all of this that you get the next verse, which starts with a clear divine first person, I am the Lord. All right. Okay. I think I'm going to, again, in the interest of question, you can see, once again, the attributes, praises God as creator, reflects on what that means, shows himself in accord with God's self-presentation. So, right, okay. You have lots of this stuff throughout 40 through 55. And again, I don't think I'll read it. I think this. Almost all of not all of them, but almost all of them, the messenger formulas have some kind of elaboration. I am the one who created the heavens and the earth. I am the Holy One of it. Thus says the Lord. Not I am the one. That would be direct bonded speech. Thus says the Lord who created the heavens and the earth. Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Thus says the Lord, the King. Thus says the Lord who created you, Israel. All right. You have all of these elaborations to this divine third person speech. All right. And I could read all this, but, these are the reasons why I think that what you have here is not simply God saying the divine messenger formula. It is indeed the prophet. All right. So what does this do? All right, what does this do? What do these conclusions about elaborate? What are my conclusions about these elaborations? Well, again, I think the weight of the evidence is that these are part of the prophet's speech, and there are a few places where it's a little bit murkier. I will admit that, but most of them, I think, is fairly clear. Again, what this does is this gives you a description of what I would call the prophetic persona. This voice that is, I hope I've made some sort of a case, that is very present throughout these chapters once you start noticing it. And the elaborations to the divine messenger formula are part of that presence, right? Again, the attributes, the speaker shows himself to be someone who is a faithful witness of what God is doing in the world, as well as to how God's own self-descriptions in these chapters, right? Okay. These things keep the prophet present throughout these chapters, even as God takes over with that first-person speech, right? They present a positive picture of the prophet, in contrast with the picture of a reluctant and demoralized Israel that one finds in 40 through 48. And this helps to pave the way for the prophet's commissioning in 49, 1 through 6, where the servant now takes on Israel's mission to the nations in addition to his ongoing mission to Israel itself. It's probably significant that after Isaiah 49, these elaborations to the messenger formula become much simpler and less frequent. contributing to a blurring of divine speech and that of the prophet or the servant. In other words, before 49, they have the function of keeping that individual present for you so that when you get to 49, that first-person voice of the servant doesn't come as a great surprise. All right. All right, I think that is what I need to say. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat unorthodox overview. I'll make simply a couple final conclusions. I think I've done that. Basically, what I hope I've made some sort of a case is that these overlooked little half verses or songs or elaborations to the messenger formula, that they actually play an important part in mediating the speech of God and the prophet to both Israel and to subsequent readers, as well as in providing a model for how that speech should be appropriated by these readers, right? And I think that it's interesting that the persona of the prophet in these earlier chapters is similar to what we see when we actually get to the servant Psalms, where the speaker speaks in the first person. Okay, I'm sorry I have tested your patience with this very technical sort of thing, but I hope it was something of interest. I don't know, or something maybe that you have never heard before. So I hope. I don't think I found it anywhere. So we'll see.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.